I found a way to read books that allows me to remember everything I read, and I'll be sharing that with you in the next few minutes. Hello everyone, my name is Umar and welcome back to the diary. Today's episode is going to be on how we can read books in a more effective way. I used to think of people who read books as geeks or nerds, and here I am today. I think seeking knowledge should be a priority for everyone, regardless of how old they are. As the quotes go, knowledge is power and information is liberating. I read because I enjoy knowledge, not because I like reading. That's also why I can't read fiction books. I started taking reading seriously during COVID when I had a lot of free time, and all I can say is it's an absolute game changer. Now, why should you be reading? Reading opens up your mind so much in terms of new knowledge and different perspectives. It's literally a pathway into the life, the mind, the experiences of people that have achieved success in things that you are currently working hard for. There's never been a time in the world where information has been this accessible. So you can imagine the amount of invaluable information you have at the tip of your fingers. Now that I'm writing a book myself, the Inspiration book, which is also releasing later this year, inshallah, I have a much better idea of just how much time people put into writing books. There are people that spend a lifetime of research, experiments, and analysis just to compress all of that information into a book that is 100 to 300 pages long, that you can get for a little amount of money, sometimes even for free. Personally, I think it's worth it. But just reading isn't enough. If you're someone that reads, I ask you, how likely are you to remember the key points from all the books you've read? Or how likely would you be to be able to explain those books to someone else? There's no point reading 100 self-help books if I don't remember anything from the books and I don't implement them in my life. So I started finding ways to eliminate that problem. I learned that our brains are built for processing information and not remembering. On average, we consume about 34 gigabytes of information every single day, and our brain generates about 50,000 thoughts. That is a lot. So if you try to read to remember, you're automatically setting yourself up to fail. But I want to point out a quick miracle that defies those odds. There is no book in the world that people can remember word for word, even if it's not a particularly long book, with the exception of one book that so many people in the world have been able to memorize 600 pages of, in a language that some of those people don't even speak. Of course, that book is my favorite book of all time, the Quran. Going back to the keys that have helped me transform how I read, ensuring that I'm not just reading for the sake of it, but actually benefiting from the books that I go through. You can also try applying this to audiobooks, podcasts, and whatever source of information that you consume the most. I'll break it down into a 3-step system, which I call TRS. It's basically take notes, revisit, and summarize. Taking notes is basically about having a system to note down all the key things you take as you read along. You can do this by highlighting physically or writing them down in your notes app, which is currently how I do it. And I'll show you what that looks like with this book. So having gone through this book, it would look something like this on my phone. It's a list of the key things I take away from the book. And this note is basically a compilation of all the books I read. I heard of an app called Readwise, which basically allows you to highlight from a Kindle and directly compiles them for you on the app. Because of that, I would probably invest in a Kindle to save me the time and the hassle of having to read books and write notes on my phone. The second step is to revisit. After you are done highlighting your notes, you need to go through the book again, but this time you'd only be going through the things that you think are important, i.e. the things that you've highlighted. I want you to think about the time when you were in school, or if you're still in school. Imagine going through a whole academic year and not having your notes when it's time to revise for the exams. How likely are you to actually pass that exam? Being honest, you'd probably fail, and I would too. That's why it's very important to have a smaller version of your takeaways. Now, the last thing you need to do is basically summarize those takeaways that you've compiled. No matter how long a book is, whether it's 10 pages or 500 pages, there is a particular message that that book is trying to get across. All you need to do is gather all your takeaways and summarize that message in 3 to 6 lines in your own words. Doing this makes the process of reading a bit more time consuming, but you get so much more quality at the end of the book. For any book I've done this for, I only have to read the book once and never again. I started doing this about a year and a half ago, and I can give you all the key takeaways from the books I've read within that period of time. I also do this for podcasts and YouTube videos that I watch as well. If you're struggling to read entirely, then I'll say 2 things. Firstly, you don't have to read every book and do this. And secondly, you don't have to read every book cover to cover. Some books, I don't put myself through the hassle of having to take notes, compile, summarize. I just read them and try to take as much away as I can. I specifically differentiate between the books that I want to read and the books that I want to really digest. This helps me read more books and helps me also save time and energy as well. And the second thing about not having to read every book, it may sound strange, but you don't have to read every single book cover to cover. If I'm halfway through a book and I feel like I've taken away the key message, the rest of it is just excess information for me. It's just like content you watch on YouTube. If you're watching a video that's 2 hours long, by the time you watch 30 minutes, if you feel like you've gotten what you clicked for, you don't watch the rest of the video. And it's literally the same thing with books. If you've taken away what you need to take away, you don't have to read the rest of the book. I'll end with a few book recommendations that I found very useful in my reading journey so far. The first book I'll highlight is The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. This book, I feel like, is a book for success. If you're someone that has high aspirations, definitely give this book a read. The second book I'll talk about is Atomic Habits. I don't have a copy with me, but it's probably the best book out there right now for building healthy habits and getting rid of bad habits. The third book I'll recommend is Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. My biggest takeaway from this book is to always stay a student at every point in your life, no matter how successful you get. The fourth book I recommend is a finance book, which is called The Richest Man in Babylon. This was actually the first book I read that was not the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's a really, really good finance book. And the last book I recommend is this book, Allah Loves by Umar Suleiman, because it's Umar Suleiman. And lastly, the best book of all time and my favorite book, the Book of Allah. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. Please share your tips on how you read effectively along with your book recommendations. See you soon.